Hey all, Flame here, and welcome to a special commentary of DLC Quest, a game by Going Loud Studios. I feel like this playthrough probably needs a little bit of context and a little bit of setup here, so let me take you back to the days of the 7th console generation, the period of time where the Xbox 360, the PlayStation 3 and the Wii were the main systems that everyone was using. There was a fairly recent concept that was coming about within the gaming industry known as downloadable content, which we take for granted these days, but back during that period of time, this was something that was very new and it was very much still finding its footing. There were a lot of teething issues as to what people were willing to pay for, and also how far publishers would push their luck. You would have DLC packs that made sense. You would have things like map packs for shooter games where you get new multiplayer maps to play on. You would get things like new characters in fighting games that would naturally add a new element to the multiplayer meta. Things like that people were mostly okay with paying a little bit more money for just to get a new product, a new element in their game. There are other DLC packs that came off as quite cynical and quite excessive. And that is exactly what this game is a satirical take on. And while it may not be the most biting satire of all time, it very much does hit the nail on the head of the kind of cynicism and the kind of frustrations that people had at that period of time. But also, as for why I'm covering this now, around that same time, around 2012, I decided that I wanted to move away from just doing videos where I would upload Guitar Hero and Rock Band playthroughs, and I wanted to do a bit of commentary, and I wanted to do like some other games, cover some Sonic, cover some Pokemon, things like that. And on this day, the 10th of March, exactly 10 years ago, I made the channel FlameHisWorld. So this is a bit of a retrospective celebration because this was one of the earlier games that I covered on FlameHisWorld as a Let's Play. And I thought that given I have a love and appreciation for this game, and it's one of those games that I've always had a soft spot for from that era, I might as well revisit it now. And I have a better mic, I have a worse sleep schedule, so let's see how this goes. So what the game is eventually doing, its structure here, is that you collect these coins which are your in-game currency, and the in-game unlock system, as you've already seen from me getting things like the animation pack and the music pack, is that your progress is dictated by how many DLC expansions you've bought in-game. And it does some clever things along the way too, like this for example. Here we have an encounter with someone called Random. A literal random encounter. This is the level of humour that this game carries itself on, and in the context of when this was released, the fact that not too many games were doing this sort of thing at this period in time, I find this genuinely endearing. I am a lot more cynical towards this kind of thing when it comes out these days because I feel like the whole meta joke thing has maybe been overdone. But as one of the first, I think this gets a pass. I still do find this quite endearing, just replaying this for the commentary. I had a big smile on my face the whole time, so yeah, it might be a bit of a guilty pleasure these days, but I enjoy it. While there are some elements in this game that may feel a little bit dated, like we already saw that there's a DLC pack available for Halt's Armor, which back in the day that was something everyone was making jokes about. Nowadays I would imagine most people probably don't even know what that's a reference to. There are some that have unfortunately retained their relevance, and the one that I do want to draw attention to is one we saw just now, when we had to grind to be able to use the sword. This is a problem I think has only got worse over time, because the problem you have is where being able to skip grinding is incentivized to the point where that's something the game considers worth paying for. And that is the most cynical way of spelling it out, but it's hard to ignore the fact that it's considered worth investing your money in not having to play the game as much. Which tells me, if anything, that the game itself is a grind. And sometimes that literally does feel like something that's being shoehorned in by a greedy publisher and maybe the devs didn't want to do it. But I feel it's got worse in recent times with the advent of mobile games, and games that follow that kind of business structure, the freemium business structure. Because what you tend to get, and I've seen this with different mobile games that people talk about and that, is that usually when there's some kind of in-game currency, you're able to unlock so much of that in-game currency within a period of time. And you get a lot of games now where you would have to stand and wait for the next hour or the next day before you can move on to the next part of the game. Or you can pay to speed that process up. And that's something that wasn't even a thing back here. This was just talking about the games that had grindy areas that, you know, you might want to fast forward a bit. But now there's entire games that are built around that concept, and in hindsight, seeing that some of the things this game's criticising were the big, oh no, like this is a problem kind of elements, kind of makes me feel a bit more cynical about the industry now, I can say that for sure. Because I know, like, there's this whole ongoing division when it comes to video game discourse. There's the people who try to be optimistic, and there's the people who just fall back into the cynicism over and over. And obviously the healthier solution there is to try and find a happy medium, but sometimes when you see things like that, it really does sort of highlight that a lot of that cynicism is warranted. I am a little bit out of touch with some of this, given I don't really dabble in AAA stuff that much, which is usually where it's the most egregious. But one example I do have from fairly recent memory is when I played a bit of Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Because that game has a level up system where, in order to get into the next story missions, from what I remember, you would have to reach a certain in-game level. And you could do that by just doing side quests and doing little bits of optional content. Or you could pay to get an experience boost. And what does that tell you about the side content? What does that tell you about how engaging the side quests are? You know, again, that is the cynical take, but I don't know, like, if you're saying I can pay for the benefit of not doing it, it kind of gave me not a great impression, and I didn't really get much further in that game after seeing that, because it was a game that I wanted to give a shot because I love seeing London in video games. I like being able to look at the screen and think, I know that place, I've been there, I recognise that. But no, that kind of put me off a little bit, and there's other reasons why I don't really dabble in AAA stuff. I feel like a lot of the time, a lot of the games, they're just not for me a lot of the time. I've always been more into me Scrimblow games, you know, like my platformers and RPGs and things like that. Those kind of games that are not really represented in AAA gaming that much. And I also don't want to make this a indie good, mainstream bad thing either, because that's just not true a lot of the time for a start, and also it's a generalisation, it's a bit reductive for everyone involved there, and I'd rather just not lower myself to that kind of shitting on games. But I do also appreciate about this game, like, you're seeing the interactions with this character here, and it is playing off meta comments on different video game tropes beyond just the DLC things. I appreciate that. And I appreciate that for a couple of reasons. One is because the game could very easily outstay its welcome if it didn't. But also because it kind of makes it feel more fun. Like, the sense of humour in general, this had the potential to very much be an almost mean-spirited kind of jab, but I don't feel it ever oversteps itself into that territory. It does feel very much like a I love this industry, but come on guys kind of commentary, more so than just everything's shit, everything's fucked. This was the pre-Doomer era. But I will say, like, going back to this game, I did actually re-watch my earlier commentary of this from back in 2012. I went through and I suffered for my art by re-listening back to my 16-year-old self. And I do feel like my opinions on the quality of the game are mostly the same. The only thing that maybe I'm not too much of a fan of these days that I used to like is the visuals, really. And that's not to say it's bad. This game does still look passable. I just kind of feel like with so many newer retro throwback games doing the pixel art thing better, I've kind of been spoiled. Remember, this game came out pre-Shovel Knight, pre the final version of Freedom Planet. Once those came about, you know, like, there was a new level set. We expected our modern day pixel art games to look so much prettier than this. This is not a bad attempt. Bear in mind that this is a very small independent project. This was not a funded thing. I don't think there was ever like a Kickstarter or anything for this game. It was just something that the studio did as a bit of fun and put it up. So, like, in that context, yeah, this looks absolutely fine. It's just the thing that kinda doesn't look too great to me is that the sprite for the main character is very simple. And the background, while it's a nice background on its own, the art style isn't really cohesive. It literally is a pixel art foreground pasted over a bitmap background. It's a bit of a mismatch. That's not really a big criticism, in fairness. And like stuff like the music, I think they just licensed music from somewhere, but it sounds nice, so I can't complain there. This is already it's commented on the more egregious pay to not grind thing, but it's also, as we see here with the sexy outfits pack, which is ridiculous, but that's the thing that was quite common then as well. It is commenting on the cosmetic DLC packs that were very common back in the day. They're still kind of common now. You see it a lot with anime games, like these Senran Kagura kind of games and whatnot. But that was a thing that was very contentious back then, because it's one of them that you could argue it's not an issue because it's optional and you're not really missing anything by not buying it. But it's also like, what's the fucking point? If you can pay money to have your character slightly recolored, it just doesn't feel something substantially worth paying for. And I feel like there's more of an argument to be made when it's like a smaller, maybe an independent project or maybe a publisher who aren't that big doing it as just a way that people can support them. That's a much newer trend that wasn't really a thing back then. But that might be something that people would be more okay with these days. Like, rather than maybe donating to a developer's Patreon, you would buy an optional DLC and just have a cosmetic change. And you get something a bit more tangible for it. But yeah, it was very much a point of contention back in the Xbox 360 era. I will say though, speaking of the idea of just supporting developers and that being a thing that people are a lot more conscious of, one thing I am very happy about in recent times, like to bring a more positive change into this rather than just being cynical about how the industry is getting worse, I feel like there's a much better appreciation for indie games and what they are these days. a big part of that, I feel, is that they're much better integrated into online stores and online download services. When I first played DLC Quest, it wasn't on the PC version that I'm playing here. It was actually part of something the Xbox 360 had called Xbox Live Indie Games. It was a separate download store that it was attached to the main game download service, but it was sort of just tucked away in its own little category. And that, it was originally known as Xbox Live Community Games. They renamed it to Xbox Live Indie Games a little while later. But that ended up carrying a bit of a stigma with it, because the only way that independent publishers, independent developers even, could get their games onto the system, from what I remember, is specifically through that. But it was also one of those services that just anyone could slap their shit on. So you had interesting little projects like this, but they were just buried between mountains and mountains of like sexy poker and all these anime dating sims that had the worst artwork known to man. So like it was very hard for games like this, or any independent game that had a unique appeal to it, to actually get noticed there, because it just sort of, it built up this stigma that if a game was in this little indie games category, then it was probably shit. Whereas nowadays, any game that has a bit of promise or a better chance for it to get a market, and it just sits there like on the eShop or whatever, just next to fucking like Mario or Pokemon or whatever. So like, you know, if you've got a unique idea for a game and you've got the talent and the team to pull it off, you can make it work. And that I am very, very happy about. But yes, we are getting closer to the end of the game now. It is a very short game. As you can probably guess from the way the game's run so far, we're probably not going to get a good, satisfying ending for free. That's not how games work now that they can slap a better ending in as DLC, right? Like, I know there was a big example of this. I can't remember whether that was the Mass Effect 3 thing. I know that had a contentious ending, and I think that was one that they released a better ending as DLC. I may be conflating a couple of things there, but I do definitely remember that being one of the big controversies around this generation, where it was like, you don't even get a story ending and have it be satisfying on the disc anymore. You have to even pay just to finish the game itself, and that was just one of the things. Like, there's so many more of these little practices that I haven't even touched on yet. Like, there was a big thing at one point about on-disc DLC, which was the epitome of taking the absolute fucking piss. What had happened is that a lot of people can excuse DLC when it's like extra content that was developed after the main game had finished being worked on. But there were some games where there would be extra content on the disc itself, but you would have to pay to get like a digital key to unlock it. But yeah, here is the second possible ending. I am showing off all three of them this time, because I went straight to the good ending last time. But if we have every DLC pack except for one, or if we have enough DLC packs to get to this stage except for one, we get this ending here. I knew this horse would come in handy one day. Oh wait, no, never mind. That horse went down pretty easily, didn't he? If only he had some armour. I still get the giggles from this game's humour all these years later. It's fantastic. Yeah, I'm trying to think what other controversies there were. There's so fucking many of them now. Like, I know nowadays there's a lot as well, but it just sort of becomes part of the news cycle of here's the thing that, like, here's some shitty thing that a new publisher's doing this week. And when you go back to simpler times from the early 2010s back then, yeah, I don't know, like, I can't even say specifically whether it was better or worse, but there were a lot of different things we worked out about, for sure. But yes, there is one more DLC pack to buy, and it's the horse armor, and that's kind of the big thing here. This game being as short as it is, I think is kind of the right length for what it's trying to do. You know, like, the thing with a satire game is that it very easily could outstay its welcome. Although that being said, this game does actually have a sequel, which I have yet to play. I wanted, for the sake of this playthrough, for the throwback playthrough, to just cover the original campaign as I did back in the day. There is a sequel called DLC Quest Live Freemium or Die, which, as I say, I haven't played, maybe I will soon. But that comes free with the Steam version nowadays if you want to buy that and get it. I do recommend it, you know, like, I have... This original campaign I've had a lot of fun with. I've probably got more mileage out of it than most people do, but it's funny, it's clever, and our horse with his armour managed to save the day. So, as our true hero of the game, the horse walks off with his princess bride. Where do I stand on this? I think it's great. After all these years, it's still funny, it's still making me laugh. Maybe it is a guilty pleasure kind of thing, and maybe not everyone will get it the way I did, but I'm glad to have replayed it. I'm glad to have shown it off again to you guys in HD this time with a better mic. Still awkward commentary, but awkward for different reasons, but hey. If you've been around on the channel since the early days, thank you so much. If you're new here, then I hope you enjoy what you see. And I guess that's it. I will see you next time for another FlameHisWorld playthrough. Bye bye for now.